Jake thought he had it all: a loving wife, a dream home, a life built on sacrifice. But when Sarah's cold words shatter their marriage, revealing a betrayal that cuts deeper than he ever imagined, Jake's world unravels. Determined to reclaim his worth, he uncovers a shocking secret that flips the script. Will he walk away or fight for justice in a way no one sees coming? Buckle up for a roller coaster of loyalty, deceit, and a comeback that'll leave you speechless. Jake Morales pulled into the parking lot of their Miami beachfront condo, the engine of his beat-up sedan humming as he double-checked the takeout bags from La Palapa, Sarah's favorite spot for Cuban food. Tonight was their 7th anniversary, and he'd spent the afternoon juggling code reviews to leave work early. His plan: a candlelit dinner to rekindle the spark that had dimmed between them. He grabbed the bags, their savory aroma filling the car, and headed upstairs, a hopeful grin tugging at his lips. Sarah had been distant lately, buried in late-night meetings and vague excuses, but Jake was determined to remind her of the life they'd built together. Inside, he set the table with care, arranging the ropa vieja and plantains with a precision that mirrored his approach to debugging software. He even queued up a playlist of old salsa tunes they used to dance to in their tiny apartment back when dreams felt bigger than paychecks. As he lit the candles, the door clicked open. Sarah stepped in, her heels clacking against the tile, her eyes glued to her phone. "Hey," Jake called, his voice warm. "Got a surprise for you." She glanced up, her expression flat. "What's this?" she asked, slipping off her shoes without breaking stride. Jake gestured to the spread, expecting a smile, maybe a hug. Instead, she sighed, dropping her bag on the counter. "Jake, I'm exhausted. Can we not do this tonight?" His stomach twisted, but he kept his tone light. "It's our anniversary, Sarah. Thought we could take a break, just us." He stepped closer, hoping to bridge the gap he'd felt growing for months. Her late nights at the marketing firm, the way she'd dodge his questions about her day, it all stung, but he chalked it up to her chasing that big promotion. Sarah crossed her arms, her gaze hardening. "I'm not your obligation, Jake. You don't get to decide when I'm supposed to play happy wife." Her words landed like a sucker punch, sharp and unexpected. He blinked, searching for a response, but she pressed on. "This marriage doesn't mean I owe you anything. Not dinner, not time, not whatever this is." She waved a hand at the table, dismissing the effort he'd poured into it. Jake's jaw tightened, the warmth draining from him. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice low, a mix of hurt and disbelief. He'd spent years prioritizing her, skipping game nights with friends, working overtime to cover their mortgage, even turning down a dream job in Silicon Valley because she wanted to stay in Miami. And now this? "I'm saying I'm tired of you acting like I'm supposed to perform for you," she snapped, her tone cold, almost rehearsed. "I don't owe you intimacy, Jake. Or anything else." She turned away, her phone buzzing in her hand, and disappeared into the bedroom without another word. Jake stood frozen, the candles flickering in the silence. The food sat untouched, the music looping to a song they used to love. He replayed her words, each one slicing deeper. Intimacy. He hadn't been asking for a performance. He'd been asking for a connection, for proof they were still a team. But her dismissal made it clear. She didn't see him as a partner, not anymore. The realization hit harder than the argument itself. 7 years of sacrifices, nights spent helping her prep for presentations, weekends fixing up their condo, moments he gave up for her, felt erased in a single conversation. He sank into a chair, staring at the cooling plates. Part of him wanted to storm after her, demand answers, but another part, quieter and colder, whispered to let it go. Not forever, but for tonight. He needed to think, to process what her words meant for them. As he cleared the table, scraping uneaten food into the trash, a resolve began to form. If Sarah didn't owe him anything, then maybe he didn't owe her the version of himself that kept bending over backward to hold their marriage together. Not anymore. Jake Morales woke to the hum of his laptop, the glow of unfinished code casting shadows in his dimly lit Miami condo. It had been 3 days since Sarah's cutting words, her declaration that she owed him nothing, had upended their anniversary dinner. He hadn't confronted her again, choosing instead to bury himself in work, but the sting lingered, gnawing at him during quiet moments. Today, though, he noticed something new, a shift in Sarah's routine. She left for her marketing job before dawn, her phone clutched tightly, and didn't return his text about picking up groceries. It wasn't just distance, it was secrecy. At his tech startup, Jake's cubicle became a refuge. He poured himself into a new project, debugging lines of code with a focus he hadn't felt in months. But during a coffee break, His coworker Miguel, a cybersecurity whiz, noticed his distraction. "You good, man?" Miguel asked, leaning against the break room counter. Jake hesitated, then spilled just enough: Sarah's coldness, her dismissal of their marriage. Miguel frowned, suggesting Jake check for signs of trouble, digital ones. "People hide stuff in plain sight," he said, half joking. "Ever check her laptop? You know, for peace of mind?" Jake bristled at the idea, but curiosity took root. That night, Sarah was out late again, claiming a client dinner. Alone in their condo, Jake opened her laptop, a device they'd shared passwords for years ago, back when trust wasn't a question. He wasn't snooping, he told himself, just confirming she was still the woman he married. But as he scrolled through her messaging app, his heart sank. Flirty texts with Ryan C., her coworker, popped up, timestamped during her so-called late nights. "Missed you at the bar," one read. "Can't wait for our next meeting," another said, with a winking emoji that made Jake's stomach churn. He didn't confront her right away. Instead, he took screenshots, his hands trembling, and sent them to his phone. The next morning, over breakfast, he tested the waters. "How's Ryan doing?" he asked casually, watching her pour coffee. Sarah froze, her grip tightening on the mug. "Fine," she said too quickly. "Why?" Jake shrugged, keeping his voice even. "Just curious. You've been spending a lot of time with him." Her eyes narrowed, and she snapped, "You're being paranoid. It's just work." But her defensiveness betrayed her, and Jake knew he'd struck a nerve. Rather than escalate, Jake pulled back. He stopped asking about her day, stopped planning dinners, stopped filling the silence she left behind. Instead, he redirected his energy. He joined a gym near his office, lifting weights to burn off the anger that simmered beneath his calm facade. He reconnected with old friends, grabbing beers with Miguel and others, laughing for the first time in weeks. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of himself he'd lost trying to keep Sarah happy. Meanwhile, she seemed oblivious, or maybe indifferent, to his change. She'd brazen late, engrossed in her phone, barely acknowledging him. But Jake wasn't done digging. Late one night, unable to sleep, he logged into their joint bank account, something he hadn't checked in months, trusting Sarah handled their finances. What he found hit harder than the texts: small, regular transfers to an unfamiliar account, totaling thousands over the past year. The recipient? A vague RC Consulting. His mind raced. Ryan again? He forwarded the statements to Miguel, who promised to trace the transactions discreetly. "Give me a couple days," Miguel texted. "This smells off." As Jake waited, Sarah's behavior grew bolder. She left her phone out one evening, a careless move. A notification flashed. "Ryan, meet me tomorrow, usual spot." Jake's pulse quickened, but he didn't touch the phone. Instead, he noted the time and place: a downtown bar, tomorrow at 8 p.m. He wasn't sure what he'd do with the information, but it fueled his resolve. Sarah thought she could dismiss him, gaslight him, maybe even betray him without consequence. But Jake was no longer the husband who'd bend over backward to please her. He was watching, planning, and for the first time, he felt in control. Jake Morales sat in his car outside a dimly lit downtown Miami bar, his fingers tapping the steering wheel as he watched the entrance. It was 8:05 p.m., the time and place from the text he'd seen on Sarah's phone. He wasn't here to make a scene, just to confirm what his gut already knew. The past week had hardened his resolve. Her secretive texts with Ryan, the mysterious bank transfers, and her dismissive attitude had pushed him past hurt into a cold, focused determination. He needed proof, not just for himself, but to protect the life he'd built. Inside the bar, through the tinted windows, he spotted Sarah at a corner booth, laughing with Ryan, her hand brushing his arm. The sight twisted something in Jake's chest, but he stayed calm, snapping a quick photo with his phone. Evidence, not emotion, would guide him now. He drove home, the image burning in his mind, and waited for Miguel's update on the bank transfers. By morning, Miguel called with a bombshell. RC Consulting was a shell company tied to Ryan, who was skimming funds from Sarah's marketing firm for a side hustle, likely without her full knowledge. Worse, some of the transferred money came from Jake and Sarah's joint savings, drained to the tune of $15,000. Jake's next move was calculated. He contacted a lawyer, Elena, recommended by a friend. In her sleek Coral Gables office, he laid out everything: the texts, the photo, the bank statements. Elena nodded, her pen moving swiftly over a notepad. "You've got a solid case for divorce and potential fraud," she said. "But we need more to nail Ryan and protect your assets." She advised hiring a private investigator to track Ryan's dealings without alerting Sarah. Jake agreed, signing the retainer with a mix of relief and dread. This wasn't just about their marriage anymore. It was about justice. Over the next few days, Jake played his part at home, keeping interactions with Sarah brief and neutral. She seemed to sense his distance, her usual sharpness replaced by fleeting attempts at warmth, offering to cook dinner, suggesting a weekend getaway. Jake declined politely, citing work, but his refusal wasn't spite. He was building a case, and every move had to be precise. Meanwhile, the investigator delivered. Ryan was using Sarah's access to her firm's client list to pitch shady deals, funneling profits through his shell company. Sarah's role wasn't clear, complicit or clueless, but she'd used Jake's industry connections to land her firm's biggest client, a tech startup, which got her the promotion she'd been chasing. The betrayal cut deeper than Jake expected. She hadn't just strayed emotionally. She'd leveraged his network, his sacrifices, for her own gain. He channeled the anger into action, meeting Elena again to strategize. They drafted a plan, compile the evidence, secure their joint accounts, and confront Sarah with undeniable proof. Jake also tipped off her firm's compliance officer anonymously, attaching Ryan's financial trail. If Sarah was involved, she'd face consequences. If not, she'd still see Ryan's true colors. The confrontation came on a humid Friday evening. Jake waited until Sarah returned from work, her briefcase slung over her shoulder. He'd set up his laptop on the kitchen counter, documents ready. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady. Sarah sighed, assuming another argument, but froze when he slid the laptop toward her. Screenshots of her texts with Ryan, bank transfer records, and the investigator's report stared back at her. "What is this?" she stammered, her confidence unraveling. "This is you and Ryan stealing from our savings," Jake said, pointing to the statements. "And using my contacts to climb your ladder while lying to my face." He laid out Ryan's scheme, her role in it, and the firm's ongoing investigation. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through the evidence, her excuses crumbling. "I didn't know about the money," she whispered, but Jake cut her off. "You knew enough to betray me," he said, his tone final. "I'm done being your stepping stone." Jake Morales packed a duffel bag with essentials, laptop, clothes, a few books, and left the Miami condo he'd once called home. After confronting Sarah with the evidence of her betrayal, he couldn't stay under the same roof. Her stammered denials, claiming she didn't know the full extent of Ryan's financial schemes, rang hollow. Jake didn't care if she was a pawn or a player. She'd used him, and that was enough. He crashed at Miguel's apartment, a small place near South Beach, and focused on his next steps. The confrontation had lit a fire in him, not rage, but clarity. He was done carrying their marriage alone. The next morning, Jake met with his lawyer, Elena, to finalize his strategy. She'd already frozen their joint accounts, ensuring Sarah couldn't touch what was left of their savings. "You've got enough for a clean divorce," Elena said, sliding a stack of papers across her desk. "But the firm's investigation into Ryan might implicate her. Your tip was airtight." Jake nodded, his jaw set. He'd sent Sarah's company a detailed dossier, bank records, Ryan's shell company details, and proof of their misuse of client contacts. It wasn't personal vengeance. It was accountability, legal and precise. Back at Miguel's, Jake threw himself into work, landing a freelance coding gig that paid better than his startup job. The extra cash gave him breathing room, but more importantly, it fueled his confidence. He wasn't just surviving, he was rebuilding. He started running along the beach each dawn, the rhythm of his steps syncing with his thoughts. Sarah's texts came sporadically, pleas to talk, promises to explain, but he left them unanswered. He wasn't ready to hear her voice, not when every word felt like a trap to pull him back into her orbit. A week later, the fallout hit. Miguel forwarded a news alert. Sarah's marketing firm had fired her after an internal audit confirmed her role in sharing proprietary client data with Ryan. The company didn't press charges, but her reputation in Miami's tight-knit marketing scene was trashed. Ryan, meanwhile, vanished. Rumors swirled he'd skipped town when the firm started digging. Jake felt no satisfaction, only a quiet relief that the truth had consequences. He'd protected himself, and that was enough. Sarah showed up at Miguel's one evening, unannounced. Jake opened the door, his expression neutral as she stood there, clutching her purse. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small. He stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him to keep the conversation private. "What's left to say?" he replied, crossing his arms. She launched into a rehearsed speech. How Ryan manipulated her, how she got caught up in ambition, how she never meant to hurt him. Jake listened, unmoved. "You chose him over us," he said. You chose your career over me, and you used my connections to do it. Her eyes welled up, but Jake didn't soften. You don't get to rewrite this now, he continued. I gave you everything, time, support, my dreams, and you threw it away. Sarah tried to interrupt, blaming stress, claiming she'd change, but Jake raised a hand. I'm filing for divorce. You'll hear from Elena. He turned back inside, leaving her standing alone, her words fading into the humid night air. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and progress. Jake moved into a small rental near his new job, a tech firm that valued his skills. He joined a local coding meetup, connecting with people who shared his passion, not his pain. Sarah's attempts to reach him dwindled, her messages growing shorter, more desperate. Jake didn't block her. He didn't need to. He was building a life where her absence no longer defined him. The divorce proceedings began, and with Elena's help, he ensured his financial security. The condo, their biggest shared asset, would be sold, the proceeds split fairly. For the first time in years, Jake felt unburdened, ready to chase his own future. Jake Morales stood on a Miami beach at dusk, the ocean lapping at the shore as the sky burned orange. 6 months had passed since he walked away from the condo, and Sarah, for good. The divorce was finalized, the condo sold, and the proceeds split evenly. He'd moved into a modest apartment near his new tech firm, where his coding skills had earned him a lead role on a cutting-edge project. Tonight, though, he wasn't thinking about work. He was reflecting on the man he'd become, one who'd chosen himself over a broken past. Sarah's last attempt to reconnect came a month ago, a text asking to meet for coffee. Against his better judgment, Jake agreed, curious to see if she'd changed. They met at a quiet cafe near Betrayal, where she sat waiting, her usual confidence replaced by a nervous fidgeting. I've been seeing a therapist, she said, stirring her latte. I messed up, Jake. I took you for granted, and I'm sorry. Her voice cracked, but Jake felt no urge to comfort her. The apology was genuine, but it was also too late. I appreciate you saying that, he replied, his tone even. But I'm not the same person who waited for you to care. He didn't linger after that. Sarah's words, while honest, couldn't erase the years he'd spent pouring himself into a marriage that left him empty. Instead of resentment, he felt a quiet resolve. He wished her well, paid for his coffee, and left, closing the door on their shared history. The encounter wasn't about closure for her. It was about proving to himself that he no longer needed her validation. Jake's life had taken on new rhythm. He volunteered at a local community center, teaching coding to single parents looking to pivot careers. The work grounded him, a way to give back without losing himself. One evening, after a class, he donated half his divorce settlement to the center's scholarship fund. The decision wasn't grandstanding. It was practical, a way to turn his pain into something tangible for others. The center's director thanked him, unaware of the story behind the gift, and Jake preferred it that way. His social circle grew too. He hosted game nights with Miguel and their tech crew, their laughter filling his apartment. He even started dating, not rushing but open to connection. A colleague, Lena, caught his attention with her sharp wit and shared love for sci-fi novels. They'd grab tacos after work, debating plot twists over margaritas. It wasn't love yet, but it was possibility, something Jake hadn't felt in years. Sarah, meanwhile, had moved to a smaller apartment across town. Word reached Jake through mutual friends that she'd taken a lower-paying job at a startup, her career stalled by the scandal at her old firm. Ryan was long gone, reportedly dodging creditors in another state. Jake didn't dwell on their downfall. Their choices had consequences, and he'd played his part in exposing the truth, legally, without malice. That was enough. As he walked along the beach, the sand cool under his feet, Jake thought about the future. He'd applied for a tech conference in Austin, a chance to pitch his team's project to industry leaders. The prospect excited him, a reminder that his dreams were no longer tied to someone else's ambitions. He pulled out his phone, snapping a photo of the sunset, and sent it to Lena with a quick note, thinking of new horizons. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji, and he smiled, pocketing the phone. The tide rolled in, steady and unyielding. Jake stood still, letting the moment sink in. He'd lost a marriage, but he'd gained something more, the courage to demand respect, not just